Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Happy Monday to all of you. This is such a fantastic conversation with my friends Billie Hoard and Paul Hoard. They wrote a book called Eucontamination. This is a fantastic book. I recommend it so much. They are really into the theory of disgust and the psychology of disgust and how they see Jesus as something or someone that is a contaminant for good. I will just leave it there. Hopefully your interest is piqued. Please listen to this episode. It is fantastic. It will change the way you see the world. I've known Billie now for a few years and her brother Paul, and it's been such a privilege to get to know them and also learn from them. I got to endorse this book. They're just doing fantastic work. So I hope that you enjoy it. And as always, friends, thank you so much for being here. Let me know your feedback. You can send me an email, info@thenewEvangelicals.com. Talk to y'all later. All right, friends, welcome in. This is going to be a great conversation. Billie Hoard, Paul Hoard, two friends of mine. I mean, Billie, you and I met. I think the story is that you shot your shot a couple of years ago on Facebook Messenger and was like, "Hey, Tim, my name's Billie. I'm writing on this stuff called Disgust Theology or Theory." And I was like, okay, like this sounds interesting. And I had you on the podcast, and honestly, I didn't know you at all. I had no clue what I was in for. And I was like, and Paul, I think you were there too. Were you there on the first one? Yeah.
I think it was on the first one, yeah.
So both of you were there, and you both just blew my mind and gave me another paradigm of how I understood and started seeing the world. And since then, we've kept in touch. We've hung out several times, beer camp, the QCF conference, which is also amazing. And it's just good to have both of you back on the show again. So thanks for making time.
Oh, so glad to be here. And yep, that's how I remember it too. Yeah. I was thinking about it, like I was like, we had this thing where we wrote this academic paper and we were very excited about our new concept. And like it was getting some some positive stuff in like the very academic world. And we realized like nobody reads academic papers. I mean, academics read academic papers and otherwise nobody does. We're like, okay, so how do we actually who do we find to actually talk about this? And yeah, you were one of the first people we reached out to, the first one to have us on a show. So yeah, all the gratitude.
No, for sure. Why don't you both go ahead and just briefly introduce yourself for our audience? Obviously, it's been a couple months and we always have new people kind of coming in here. Billie, let's start with you.
Sure. So my name is Billie Hoard. I am officially now the co-author of Eucontamination. It's fun adding that to my byline now. I know, right? So with my brother who's here. I am a trans woman. I'm a lesbian. I'm a high school teacher. So, the right loves me.
They love you. Yes.
They do. I'm everybody's favorite. I'm a theologian, a pastor's wife. I live in Baltimore. I got some kids. They're amazing. Yeah. Anabaptist radical. I try to keep that one in there too.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm Paul. So I primarily go by Billie's little brother. That's kind of my big claim to fame is being related to Billie. No, I'm also a associate professor of counseling psychology. So I love the academic world and kind of exist there. But mental health counselor, psychoanalytic psychotherapist. And so in Billie and my partnership on this, I tend to bring more of the psychology, psychoanalytic side, and Billie leans a little bit heavier on the theology side. And that's where we go. But otherwise, yeah, married. I live out here in the Seattle area. So Billie and I like to straddle the country in that sense.
Yeah, I love that. I love that for both of you. Look, I don't want to rehash our first ever podcast conversation. People can go listen to it. We'll go ahead and link it in the show notes. But there is a foundation we have to kind of set for the audience who might be tuning in for the first time. I want to get into this idea of disgust. Again, really a common concept, but the way you both talk about it, I think is uncommon. And also maybe a good way of saying it is that it's kind of apocalyptic, meaning it really has an unveiling or a revealing that you realize is kind of always there but never picked up on. So Billie, let's start with you on the theology side, because again, this book you wrote, Eucontamination, goes into all of this, but I want to kind of give this foundation for the rest of our conversation. How you talk about disgust and then this new term that both of you coined, Eucontamination.
Absolutely. So, I think coming from the theology side of things, the entry on into thinking about disgust and what we call disgust theology is really going to be where people's foundation is probably going to be around purity culture, right? Mm-hmm. So purity is the sort of other side of disgust, right? So disgust is the mechanism we use to try to maintain the purity of the thing we think of as us, right? So when we talk about purity culture, when we talk theologically about sin and holiness, we have this tendency to, and the term we use in the book is that we over apply a metaphor of purity in the Bible to our kind of everyday lives and to our reading of Scripture. To the extent that we start applying the way disgust works as an emotion, as an affect, right? This is the stuff that Paul talks about, how that works as, psychologically. We start applying all of those rules and all of the logics of how disgust works to our reading of the Bible and to our understanding of sin and holiness, and how that should work, and even to our understanding of church and who can be allowed in church and who can't be allowed in church, and what it does to somebody to be sort of, I think tarred would be the word with, or stigmatized with this concept of being a sinner or of becoming impure. And that has led to horrible distortions, right? Like we would actually argue that that's what's at the root of a lot of the contemporary, especially sort of evangelical, and even like rad trad Catholic Church, leaning hard into this that us them distinction, coupled with the tendency to want to violently exclude the them. I mean, to make that disgust connection, right? When you see people just doing these over the top, desperate need to sort of perform violent expulsion of those that they see as other and as contaminating to their sense of a pure, righteous group, you're seeing this disgust logic in play, and you're seeing the damage that it causes.
Yeah, it's really well said. When you and I first had this conversation, and you and I have since developed a friendship, so I feel like I can talk about this with you. But I admitted, like in the beginning of my journey, being transgender was something that was very foreign to me, and I wouldn't use the word disgusting, but it was just like it felt off, it felt wrong, it felt like it couldn't be around me, right? I didn't know why I felt that way. There's a whole host of those reasons, but it wasn't so much fear. I wasn't afraid of a trans person. I just found it weird or strange, or like it shouldn't be in my orbit. And I think this disgust theology you're talking about is a much better label that helps underpin so much of the hatred we're seeing now, aimed at especially our queer and in particular our trans neighbors, right? I think about the words of like Matt Walsh, and I'm not going to repeat them here, obviously people know them, Nancy Mace, etc. It's not fear. It's this sense of like they're repulsed. There's something that is that they find disgusting, and that's a much more visceral reaction, I feel like, than fear, because as we're going to talk about, disgust isn't inherently bad, right? It's the reason why we don't do things that maybe could hurt us when it comes to germs and things like that. But the way it's applied in very subtle ways and not really talked about as one of the major ingredients going on in this so-called culture war, I think is important. And Paul, I kind of want to hear from you on the psychological end, because I think you talk about, and you mentioned this in the book too, how disgust is a very biological reaction. It's like it's part of the lizard brain in a lot of ways. I want to hear you kind of talk about that from a psychological standpoint.
Yeah, no, happy to. I think what's fascinating about disgust is that you experience disgust first, something that you get disgusted by something, and then you tell yourself a story about why that's disgusting. And I think this becomes really important. So when you kind of locate in the lizard brain, that's sort of like playing with different ways that we think about, anyway, the way the mind works and all of that. But one way is that like you have a physiological reaction, and even that the face of disgust, it's very visceral, right? It's that like, I'm going to throw up type of thing. Your body feels it. There's this, at the very basic idea, there's an energy that just courses through. And then your mind kicks in and tells a story to make sense of that. Oh, I must be feeling this way because of X, Y, or Z. And what's fascinating about this is that means what you think you're disgusted by actually says more about you than it does the object of disgust, is what we would call it. So this is where the phrase "don't yuck my yum," right, comes from, because what I find yucky and what you find yummy actually might be the same thing. And so it's less about the inherent property of the thing that's disgusting to you as it is the fact that you are feeling disgust.
Right.
And this is because disgust is now, and this is where we start getting to kind of more of a psychoanalytic perspective. Disgust is more about your ego and that idea of who you think you are and how you think the world is supposed to work than it is about a reflection of reality. And so when your world gets messed with, when something disturbs, like that's not the way things are supposed to be. So if you're walking around with this like very clear like gender binary, for example, use your example on like transgenderism, is to say like, actually, so when I see a transgender individual, that disturbs my sense of like my security of myself as a cis person, because suddenly instead of my cisness just being quote unquote normal or given, oh, there's actually the possibility for much more fluidity and play and complexity in my relationship to gender, my relationship to my body. And that disturbs. It's not like threat scary, but it's a disturbance. And disgust is what we experience, is actually the term we use to talk about that, like that disturbance that messes with my sense of self. And then the move then is to say, oh, must be something wrong with that transgender person, as opposed to, this says something about me and my relationship to my cisness and my body and my sense of gender and my identity, actually.
Where do you think that comes from? I mean, either one of you can answer this. Where do you think that sense of this is normal, and this disturbs me, and I have to tell myself a story, is that a sociological phenomena? Is that just biological? Is that just how humans operate? I'm just kind of curious, because then as you talk about that, Paul, I look and I go, you're totally right, but I've never seen that before. Like, I've never thought about it that way, right? Because I always focus on how it's the other person, it's not me, but it really says something about me. And as I've gotten more, as that's become, to me more normalized, having, by being in proximity to other people who live differently on the gender spectrum, so to speak, it's now I'm like, why would I ever make a big deal about that? Like, it's fine. Like, it's who they are. It's not my life. And I respect that, and I'm for it all the way. But me 10 years ago would be like what you just said, Paul. Like, I don't know, that feels unnatural, doesn't feel right. So something must be wrong with them, not with me.
Yeah, I'll explain it from my side. I think, Billie, I'm thinking of Serrano here as well, if you want to bring some of what she would say there. But like one way that the brain sometimes gets theorized is to call it an expectation machine. Your brain is always trying to predict what's about to happen, so that you're expecting it. And so it creates these little like categories and ways of organizing the world. And the only thing it has to go on is your past experience. So if you were raised in a society or so in like a culture that said, this is the way the world works, you internalize that, and these become structures of the way the world works that you expect to see. So then when something breaks that, when something defies that, we use words like uncanny, disturbing, strange,
right?
Because what's happening is suddenly your brain's capacity to like predict how a person's going to behave, what they're going to sound like, what they're going to do, what's my relationship to them, is off. Now, in that like kind of expectation thing, that's where this sort of like sense of like, I understand the world comes from. And that's where your ego has this sense of like, I know who I am and I know who the world is. And so it's going for a sense of wholeness and clarity. And when that gets shown to be disturbed, it starts kind of this crack in the facade of like, oh, maybe other things I'm taking for granted aren't right. And in most contexts, we call that maturing. Right? Like, I have small children who grow up, and they're growing up with things like, you should hold hands when you cross the street. You should look both ways. Like, right. That parents love each other, right? There's these things. And as they grow up, they're running into actually their marriages are more complicated than perhaps the one they're seeing. And that like streets, there's more complexity than just always go the crosswalk, right? Their world becomes more nuanced, more complex, as these rigid rules that they're raised with show that they work maybe 90% of the time, but then they start falling apart in different contexts, and you start needing to have more, like I teach them we don't hit, and then they watch a boxing match and like, why are they hitting? And like, wait a minute, now violence has a very different So that's called maturing normally. Right? And in fact, it's a really healthy thing to allow us to experience more complexity. But it is, I think, part of what our work on Disgust has shown is like, it is also deeply unsettling. And it requires community and relationship to be able to say, hey, that part of my world actually can begin to fall apart, because that allows something new to grow in its place. And I think, here on the New Evangelicals, I would say like, that's the beautiful side of what gets labeled deconstruction, right? It's like these laws of what I think Christianity or God or Jesus or the Bible were meant to be start breaking down based on my lived experience, based on understanding more people. And that allows me to then start living into something even more nuanced and more complex, and to even better understand like what love is, what Jesus is. And this is where we got really excited about where we went in the book with like, I'm the way, the truth, and life. But I'll stop talking now because I'm hugging the microphone, and I'm going to let my sister have some words. And I realize I have a hard time pausing myself once I get on a roll.
Hey, that's what long form podcasting is for, my friend. So live and let live, All
right, I'm gonna take over from Paul and jump to kind of the larger sociological, political, and then the religious and the theological part of this, right? So we have this sense where
just a couple things,
just a few things, Just some top line. But when we have this mechanism that kicks in, right, where disgust starts to kick in, that sense of unease, that sense of like, I don't want this troubling my built sense of like my system and myself, and it needs to be got rid of. It needs to be got rid of now, right? When this enters in, but when we look at what happens with this at a sociological level, we see this is where, we have our sense of ourselves. So Tim, you're talking about like, 10 years ago, you encounter a trans person and you're thinking like, this feels uncomfortable. Like you're a polite person. You're not going to like yell at them and shout at them. Is that right? So
yeah, to be clear, I've never done that before in my life, to be clear.
Absolutely. No. All right. But like, and then 10 years ago, most people didn't. It happens, unfortunately, more frequently now. But there was but that kind of unsettled sense of like, this person is making me uncomfortable. And you see how we framing that, right? Like instead of saying like, I am uncomfortable in encountering this person who violates my paradigm, who is making me feel like maybe my paradigm for attraction and gender and sex and all of that is not working right now, right? Instead of doing that, we just say this person is making me uncomfortable.
Yeah, right.
And when that gets cranked up to 11, as I think we're seeing now, is when things get to be very dangerous. Because at that point, a lot of individuals acting collectively start to say, people like that cannot be allowed to be part of our communal us, right? But to dial it back to something that's maybe like a little bit, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but like a little bit less fraught, and maybe a little bit more familiar to like the audience. We saw this a lot in evangelical circles for the last decade, right? Like this is the kind of thing that churches have been arguing about a lot in the context of like, first they're talking mostly about just lesbian and gay people, and then bisexuality sort of occurred to them and they freaked out a little bit. They didn't know what to do with the fact of bisexuality, right? It was not into these sort of simple modes. And then people started talking about trans people, especially starting in about really a decade ago, 2015. When trans people as a topic sort of came on the scene. And churches, I always like to point out that churches had actually been relatively, like the reaction in a lot of evangelical circles to trans people prior to 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015 was a kind of like bemused, confused, actually relatively generous acceptance, right? It was this sense of like, well, medically, maybe there's something there. There's like a famous clip of Pat Robertson just kind of straight up saying like trans people are valid. That's fine, right? He's very homophobic, but like trans people are fine. But once it became really settled, once it became an identity marker for evangelicals that they had to be anti-gay, well, the existence of a trans body confuses that, right? If a good evangelical preacher man experiences a trans woman and experiences a moment of attraction, was that gay?
Right.
Well, the answer to that is going to hinge on, is that a man or is that a woman that he is attracted to? And that's just troubling all of his paradigms. That is the sort of question that is going just to cause all kinds of angst and frustration. And what we've seen is that it leads to either, sort of social violence in the sense of like forcing that community out with a lot of force, or it leads to this kind of internalized and one-on-one cruelty and violence, but fundamentally exclusion. And all of that contrasts with Jesus, right? And this is the thing. This is what I want to come back to. All of this contrasts with Jesus. This is what really started us on this project, was the recognition, while we were being weird nerds and talking about disgust, that Jesus embodies this anti-disgust, that Jesus never acts as though he is threatened by people who don't fit the dominant paradigm, by people who are treated as contaminating by his society. He always acts as though actually his presence makes everything better, and he's not threatened by that.
Yeah, why don't we go there for a few minutes? And by the way, I just want to say this is really helpful. Hopefully, as people are listening, they're starting to put pieces together of what is animating the hatred of some people groups, right, that we're seeing, whether it's immigrants, right, who are just kind of, from these places that are kind of gross and disgusting. They're kind of third world, so to speak, as some people would say, or it's their trans neighbor who they're bending the gender binary that they've been given, so something must be wrong with them instead of the person who thinks that way, right? And I think it's really helpful to understand the level of vitriol and hatred that we're seeing from right-wing media pundits aimed at people who probably trigger some kind of disgust reaction inside of them. And instead of those people being mature enough and self-aware enough to think about, well, okay, what's going on with me? They would rather just scapegoat the out group because it serves their power and it serves their sense of self and ego, right? That I have something to offer this audience, that those people over there are the problem. One example of this I think is worth pointing out. This might help explain why the sitting president of the United States, who has been found liable by a jury of his own peers for sexually assaulting a woman, so someone who statistically is actually a danger to women, right? And that's even including his other comments that we found in 2016, the other allegations from women that he's a very that he's a sexual predator. That same person can say, I will save women by banning trans women in women's sports, and he signs a bill literally trying to ban all 10 trans women in the NCAA out of 500,000 athletes, surrounded by women with little girls applauding. And you go, how does that work? Well, because they're not disgusted by Trump, despite his behavior, right? They're disgusted at the people that he's disgusted at, and they think that those people are the real contaminant or threat to their purity and into how society should function. Do you think that's a pretty decent way of kind of maybe infusing what you're talking about into a real world scenario?
No, absolutely. I think Paul can talk about projective disgust, which I think is really going to describe that situation.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd actually. So there's a couple things that I want to jump in there with, which is one is that. I mentioned the ego before. I'm not trying to get too nerdy here, but there's this great realization that we're more defended against our awareness that we're wrong or that something is troubling us than we are against reality. So there's this great little question that I stole from a TED Talk where you ask somebody, like, what's it feel like to be wrong? And, it's embarrassing, it's shameful, blah, blah, blah. But actually, the three of us are wrong about all sorts of stuff, but we don't feel it because we don't know it. You won't feel your wrongness until you become aware. So we emotionally react to the awareness of being wrong. And so this relates to disgust because we will sacrifice reality. We'll sacrifice, like you're saying, the safety of actual women for the sake of protecting myself from finding out I was wrong. If I'm somebody who's already kind of doubled down on I'm supporting this person, I'm now have even more. There's sort of the sunk cost fallacy of now if not only if I find out I was wrong, do I have to realize I made a mistake, but I've also have to reckon with the ways that I've also hidden myself from that reality already. Protecting him and what he's saying is about actually protecting my awareness of it, and that's where disgust comes in. We're disgusted by actually most often ourselves. The thing we find most disgusting in ourselves, we often project that onto them, whoever the they may be, which is why, again, so many, we're so tired of finding out the people who have the most homophobic and transphobic and the most vitriol we find out also often get caught with some of the most kind of pretty horrific sexual behaviors in the past, because the very thing that they're accusing them, the others, of being is actually what their own disgust at themselves that they're projecting out. Now, an important thing here is this is often not conscious. It's not that they're sitting there doing it, but when we're unreflectively reacting, we don't realize how much we don't interact with reality. We're interacting with the world that we want it to be and the things that threaten our version of reality. If that makes sense.
No,
the other thing I just wanted to hit on is why disgust instead of fear? Is just the quick analogy I like to use is driving a car is dangerous. You should probably be afraid when you go on the road. Statistically, it's a pretty high probability something's going to happen. But we buckle our seatbelts, we follow road signs, and so we lower the risk.
Right.
That's because we're interacting with fear. There's a logic to it. There's a way in which, there's an acceptable amount of risk that I will take in order to get around. With disgust, there's no acceptable amount of the contaminant that we'll accept. Right. The question of how much spit will you allow in your beer is irrelevant. The answer is zero. Nobody else's spit is allowed in there. It doesn't matter. Even if I'm but it's really sterile saliva. No, none of it. Whereas with fear, we can dial it down. And this matters because then if we're dealing with the paradigm of fear, we can have an honest conversation about risk and about threat and about safety. If we're dealing with disgust, we've left honest conversations behind. Because now it's about association, and the person who's disgusted has actually ceded power to the object that they're disgusted by, because I have to be not that. It's that for me to be me, actually I now means that I'm not you. And so whatever I label you, I have to be the opposite of. And my only sense of identity now is in separating that out. I might be getting too academic here, so I'll reel myself
you're
back
definitely
in.
not. You're doing, I mean, this is what the podcast is for. So give it to him, Paul.
But it's this fascinating way of that. And this will take us back to Jesus here for a second. I'll try to land that plane of like, what's powerful, right? If you have a pure substance and you have a contaminant, what has the power in that moment?
Right.
It's the contaminant.
Right.
Because if I put a little bit of like clean water into spit, like the water's gone, but a little bit of spit into the water and the water's contaminated, right? So what have we ceded power to when we're disgusted by? We've ceded power to the contaminant. And so that means to keep something sterile, it has to be not dirty, has to be not contaminated, which means all of the agency is on the side of the contaminant. And this is where Jesus comes in, because Jesus says, you're right, that is the logic of the world, but I'm the contaminant. Instead of me and love needing to be kept separate, like what if actually like we are the thing that contaminates? And looks like Billy's gonna say something. So
I want to jump in so bad. I'm chomping at the bit.
Go for it.
No, no, this is I'm gonna like pull my like I've been listening to the Evangelicals for a while card on this one.
Aww.
Because I think one of the best possible illustrations, like especially for your audience of this, is actually your own story. Like you were talking a little bit earlier on about like having this experience of like, you know, feeling a little bit like disconcerted, that kind of low key disgust around like trans people back, you know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever that time frame would be. And here's the thing, as Paul was saying, when we identify some group or some person as disgusting, we are saying that they have the power, right? And that they threaten our purity. Right. And I've talked a little bit already about how I see this as like, this is a problem. This is actually what drives a lot of like evangelical violence towards queer people is you called out very accurately, like this is what's driving a lot of, I think, our national violence towards immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, right? Is that sense of like, they are, you know, you see a lot of the language, like they are a contaminant. They are a poison to the blood of this country, as our current president actually said, right? Like that's contamination language. So you see a lot of this and you see the danger it is. But when Paul and I started noticing that Jesus behaves as though actually he has the power in the situation, what we realize is he's not actually saying disgust reaction, disgust logic is all bad and invalid and inappropriate. Instead, he's saying the logic actually does sort of hold, but here's the thing. I am a good contaminant. I am the one who will follow those laws. I will contaminate the whole system. I am more powerful. Goodness is more powerful. Holiness is more powerful. Love is more powerful than hate. And therefore, I'm not threatened by the sin of somebody that I might be hanging out with, whether it's perceived or real, by the way.
Right. Yes.
I'm not threatened by that. In fact, anything broken or wrong or hurting in somebody else, that is threatened by the healing love that Jesus is bringing. This is the way Jesus operates. So to come back to your story, Tim, here's the thing that happens, right? If we imagined an evangelical looking at you today and talking about you to like their audience, as I'm sure has happened, right? One of the things they might say is that they might use you as a cautionary tale. They would say, look, because Tim's story, right, is that you, the chink in the armor, the thing that started you wondering about LGBT people and wondering about like the theology of exclusion was knowing a gay guy.
Yep.
Right. Yep. And then befriending a gay guy, and then learning to, you know, at the appropriate and social platonic level, love a gay person, right? In this that Christian context, right? Well, that means that person and the experience of love and bringing empathy, love, compassion, humanization into that situation changed you, right? So I think for you and for most of your audience, probably, we would say that is a good thing. That is actually an example of, in the term that Paul and I use and what we put on our book, eucontamination, good contamination, right? Like you were actually contaminated for the good by this friend who humanized himself to you, right? And you did the work of allowing that to transform, right? Instead of allowing disgust to be the driving motivator in your relationship to him, right? You had enough intimacy, enough friendship, enough space there to be able to say, okay, let this change the world. Let me look at what's happening in me. Let me look at how I have been taught, how I have thought, let me spend time and effort examining it and re-examining it so that I can make all of this start to make sense again, right? That's that maturity that Paul is talking about, right? You contaminated you. Right. So when evangelicals say we have to get these gay people out of our church, when they say you can't have empathy for the queer people, when they say you can't have empathy for immigrants and
Right.
foreigners, right? They are actually on one level absolutely correct. Because if their audience, if their churchgoers take a moment to learn to have friendship, to actually let those people into their lives and let love actually live there, well, they probably will actually follow the same path that you've gone. They will actually have to rebuild their lives, and they will have to actually, they're going to end up affirming. Like this is the truth. Not because it's wrong, and not because they are contaminated in some kind of bad way, but because they are eucontaminated towards the kind of love that God has for everybody.
Yeah. No, that's really powerful. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you're right. I mean, we can absolutely use that language. Joey was his name. He contaminated me for good, because it was that proximity that was the beginning of like, oh, this person isn't anything like what I was told this person would be like, right? And from there, I guess you could say I contaminated some more people over time.
Yeah.
But it really was, that proximity piece was really important. And I think that one of the most effective tools that high control religion, in this context, white evangelicalism, employs is this very walled off, we will interpret the outside world for you. Don't trust anyone outside of this bubble, even academia, because they want to indoctrinate you. Trust our scholars, or our theologians, our apologists, and they'll interpret it, and then stay safe in this cocoon. That way you don't get contaminated, because look at Tim Whitaker. He tried to go outside the cocoon, and now look at him. I mean, he's fully affirming, he embraces sin, he's a big woke liberal, right? But you can see how that narrative can take place. I also think it's interesting, you mentioned this, evangelicals keeping queer people out of their church, and it is interesting how the evangelical church does treat the queer community like a contaminant, and to the point where they'll even say, well, you can attend, you just can't serve, right? There are always layers of protection where the queer person can only go so far into the group, lest you become a problem, or lest we affirm sin, and then the purity of our church or our holiness is therefore contaminated. So let's talk about Jesus for a second. And the reason why I think I love both of your work the most out of everything, and there's so much to love about it, is because I love what you do with Jesus. I love subversive, ooh, that is really thought-provoking. That's a great experiment to think about. Because when it comes to purity, as we know, and so does the audience, purity is a big freaking deal in evangelical church, right? Whether it's sexual purity or you sing songs about holiness, you just have these perceptions of not sinning, which is usually, not cursing and not smoking, no porn. That's kind of like the epitome of like, hey, if you can break free from porn addiction, so to speak, you're going to be just the best Christian ever, right? Don't worry about late stage capitalism and where your dollar goes and how you support Amazon. That's not a problem. It's definitely the porn. And so, it's like you have this framework that Jesus was holy and pure and blameless, right? He didn't let sin defile him. But you kind of flip that on its head. Give us some of the theology behind this. I absolutely love it.
Jesus was in there defiling sin, right? This is what I think is just so so phenomenal, right? Like, I mean, and this is and
so good.
One of the things that I like to say is that our project, one of the things I love about our project is that it is like very fundamentally rooted in Jesus, right? Like these are old school theologies of things like the incarnation, right? So
right.
I mean, I'm talking about Jesus here. So like in the incarnation, the fundamental belief of Christianity is that God enters into the world, right? Into the realm of humanity, that which is the creator enters into creation. Already that should not happen in a disgust framework, right? Because that means that what is holy is entering into what is by all accounts fallen. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say the world is perfect and there's not something that we would call sin in the world. Like, there is some bad stuff going on no matter who you are, right?
Right.
And so this holy and perfect and loving God enters into this world. And so what would happen? Well, in that over applied disgust metaphor, what should happen is that God would be contaminated by the world. God is pure. The world is a contaminant. Right. And therefore, God should be contaminated by the world. But instead, it's God. Jesus enters into the world and redeems the world through Jesus. The world is redeemed through Jesus Christ. Right? Jesus becomes this seed of holiness, of God's love, spreading throughout. And again, the only term we could come up with was Eucontaminating, good contaminating the world. And in fact, gives that job to the church. He says, go into all the world. He uses this like infection contamination language almost for his command to the disciples. Go into all the world, spread out and spread love, right? Spread the good news of the kingdom of heaven, that people are right with God, that God has already begun this process. Right. I actually really like, I come from a vineyard background among others, and like actually love their language of like already and not yet, that God has started a process that is ongoing of actually healing and curing and blessing this world. And so let people know, because, oh my gosh, you're going to be vectors of this good contamination. Right. And this is, and so I just love it. And one of the lines that we pick up on and really love is from the Athanasian Creed, where it says that, God entered into humanity that humanity might enter into God. Right? Like that what ends up happening here is that God enters into humanity, and from here on out, the story of God can't be told without humanity. You cannot talk about God without mentioning that God is also now fully human in the human person of Jesus Christ. Jesus is this blending of godness and humanness, right? The perfect combination in one man of these two persons, God of godness and humanity.
Yeah. And
that means that everything that God does is now bringing humanity along with it. We are fully like being Eucontaminated by godness all the time. And I just think that's so cool.
Well, because it is. I mean, when you put it in that kind of language, it's like, it's cool. And also it kind of like gives you a sense of boldness, right? Of like, hey, like I can encounter the other and not be worried that they're going to contaminate me, because, a little bit goes a long way, right? Like, because look, as far as the new evangelicals go, and I know Billie and Paul, we're aligned on this, right? Like, we really hold to this idea, at a minimum, this metaphor of the idea of like partnering with God to just be loving and inclusive and kind of push the blessing of God outward to more and more people in the world, right? And that looks like all different things, all different ways, whether it's through social justice initiatives or whatever it could be. But I love that idea of like, you're right. Like I in my head, I kind of, I don't know why I still see Jesus in a white robe. I don't know why, but he is in my mind. But I just see like this little white speck kind of, going into this very dark void, and then just slowly kind of just spreading and spreading until the whole thing is lit up, right? You would think by our logic that little bit, or that the dark portion would just swallow up the light, right? But in pure in Eucontamination, no, it's the opposite. The little bit actually contaminates the whole. It's a little bit of yeast that kind of ruins the whole dough, so to speak, right? It's that spreads throughout the dough. There's something very subversive in that. And I think it speaks to even the underside of empire. I think it speaks to just the way that we are called to always speak truth to power, right? It's be that contaminant wherever we go.
Absolutely. I mean, this is straight out of John, right? Like, light has entered into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then Jesus comes in and says, don't be afraid, I've overcome the world, right? Like, so absolutely, like the metaphor is perfect. Paul, you look like you were about to jump in there.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, kind of hitting on what you said, Tim, about like how freeing, how like much more like open this is that instead of this posture of like, oh, I got cleaned, I got baptized, and now I need to like wall myself off from everything, in this almost like, obsessive compulsive, like keep myself clean, purity mindset. It's like, actually, I'm invited. I'm in fact commanded to go into the world and to allow the world to interact with me, because I'm not afraid of suddenly being contaminated. I am the contaminant. Like Jesus in me is the contaminant. And so it's this beautiful, like completely different posture. So now when you meet somebody, it's not like making a friend isn't this question of like, let's dance around to make sure our denominational differences don't rub the wrong way, and that you believe the right things. It's actually about like, that is so fascinating that you believe that. Tell me why that's important to you. Help me understand, because actually I can learn more about Jesus in difference and in learning more about others, and this openness to me being transformed. I mean, what's so interesting to me, the image of purity is static. It's dead. Right? If you're pure, you're frozen solid. Whereas transformation is growth, is change, means something has to die, something else. And this is where life is found. This is where joy is found. This is where maturity is found. I remember a friend of mine, I think when I was in my 20s, he was a football coach, and he talked about how faith for him had been like, he always imagined it like a football. Like he was given the football of his faith, and his job was to hold it really tight and then die. That's like and this fear that like, and this like, this fear that everybody else is going to try to rip it out of your hands.
Right.
And like, if you think about what a horrible, life-sucking way to live your life. And of like, if that's not the freedom in Christ that Paul talks about. That's not the life that Jesus came to bring us. And so when you reinterpret Jesus through this lens of building off of Lewis, this good infection, it completely transforms your approach to the world. Instead of fear and disgust being your primary ways of negotiating otherness, difference, it becomes love and openness and joy. I think about it like last one. I know I'm good.
Oh, go for it.
I am an obnoxiously picky eater. And
are you?
This is really, yeah, it's terrible. Despite growing up overseas.
Good to know. You and my 5-year-old share something in common.
Yeah. I share probably a lot more with 5-year-olds in common than I would like to admit. But not just my obsession with Lego, but also I love the metaphors of food in here because, again, very disgust oriented. But there's this fascinating thing where you won't know if you like a new food until you've tried it about 4 times. Because familiarity by itself is sort of comfortable, and unfamiliar, regardless of whether or not it's good for you or not, will come across somewhat threatening. It'll come across something that's weird.
Wait, can I interrupt you? I gotta say something. This makes sense. This makes sense why I will eat food that I know does not taste good. Like, I will eat junk food. This is such a bad confession, but I'm going to confess anyway, okay? Look, I live in New Jersey, okay? I live in like the pizza capital of the world, arguably. And there have been times where I will get Domino's pizza or I will get 7-Eleven pizza. And I know I can have better pizza. But for some reason, I just want like that familiarity of, back when I was a kid, we do these N64 sleepovers and get a Domino's pizza. And I just want to get one of those. And it's not bad, but it's not great. I could have better tasting pizza, but I don't want to because it's familiar to me for whatever reason. I don't want to take the risk of ordering a pizza from somewhere else and get a bad slice. Huh. Wow. Just wanted to add that into the conversation for no reason whatsoever.
No, but it's such a great example because I think, one of the things, if you're wrestling with something true, there's usually something you're going to find it in the mundane and you're going to find it in the profound, right? Like there's something beautiful if it in that, because trying something new costs something emotionally. It's uncomfortable. Like breaking out of your comfort zone is usually really life-giving and also scary and disturbing, and it's like stressful. And so there's a reason, like, you also then we do go back to the familiar. The familiar isn't in and of itself terrible, but when we're stuck there, it actually becomes a form of death. Like if you couldn't eat anything but Domino's because you were constantly craving your N64 nostalgia,
right,
that would be problematic.
Yes.
Like that would be really sad. Like, because think about all the pizza you wouldn't enjoy, like, and all the rest that wouldn't be out there. And there's something about like joy and beauty is actually found when we allow ourselves to go beyond and to be open to more. And I think an important caveat here is like, and sometimes you'll have really bad pizza. Sometimes you'll find somebody who dared to put like broccoli on their pizza, and you'll think that I tried it, or shouldn't have happened.
Or pineapple. Now that's where Disgust Theology. Listen, that's where we should hold our disgust barriers and say absolutely not. That is an abomination. Just to be clear, disgust could be used for very helpful things, and pineapple on pizza is one of them, in my opinion, and also factually true.
I am right there with you.
Oh, are we all aligned on this?
I am being very quiet right now.
Billie, oh God.
We will pray for you, Billie.
I was gonna say, let's just
I am
pray over.
Eucontaminated by pineapple.
I pray over Billie right now.
Cheese.
Please help her, deliver her from the demonic stronghold of this abomination. Oh God, pineapple on pizza. Anyway, no, that is truly helpful as we're thinking about this, right? It really is, and I just think this is one of those topics that, again, it's this both and, where once you see it, you see how it's everywhere, but it doesn't go, it's not named. Like we talk about fear, we talk about hatred, all things we should talk about, by the way, right? Not a bad thing. We don't talk about disgust. It's not in our cultural discourse. It's not language that is commonly used when we talk about the culture wars, right? And I just think it's an element that is really important to call out because it helps us understand ourselves better when we have these reactions to things that we can't understand why we have that reaction, right? There's been times in my life where I'm like, I don't know why I'm reacting this way or why I feel this way, but something feels wrong about this, right? Something feels like I should be at a distance from this person because of either what they believe or what they look like, or where they land on the gender spectrum, whatever it might be. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't fear. I wasn't afraid. I didn't hate them. It wasn't a hatred thing. They were still human beings, but there was just something else that was like, this feels weird to me. It feels off. And I think giving people this language is helpful as they navigate their own renegotiation of faith, because I love the thought, I think it's so powerful, that Christ contaminated the world. And by the way, when you guys say Eucontamination, it's EU, right? Is the
Yes.
two?
Yes.
It's not YOU, it's EU. And it's the idea of contaminating for good. I love that. It also disarms the Christian nationalist war language we hear all the time, right? This idea of like, there's an enemy that you have to destroy that's out there, and it just happens to coincide with all of his culture war issues that we're totally obsessed with, right? It totally kind of bypasses that, because the truth is, I don't want to destroy Christian nationalists. I want to contaminate them for good. One of the things that made me so sad about Charlie Kirk's untimely murder, in death, which was horrible, of course, was thinking about, I guess I still had this like ray of hope that someone like Charlie could maybe come around and like repent one day and like use all of his amazing talents when it comes to speaking and organizing as a contaminant for love and for justice instead of for hatred and division. And like, that never happened, and now he's not here anymore, right? And so I think about it like a lot of times in terms like that. I wonder why, as I'm saying this out loud for the first time, which I probably shouldn't on a podcast, but we're here. I wonder if that's why I'm so drawn to going to Christian nationalist events and talking to them, because I have like this sense of hope. Like, well, if only they could, be contaminated for good. If only they could use all of this zealousness and like this like radical action and sense of fervor in a way that wanted to contaminate the world to be more inclusive and more justice oriented and more of a space where all of our neighbors could flourish, right? And I just wonder if maybe that's part of what kind of keeps me going into those spaces to talk to them. I don't know. It's not loud thought.
If I could jump in, one of the things that sparks for me, we write about this, and I get it from another thinker named Todd McGowan, where Jesus says to go love your enemies, right? Like that's a commandment to go love them. And one of the things we write is that like a funny thing happens when you love your enemies, is that you stop having enemies, because what you have are adversaries, people who will adversarially like disagree with you, who will work against what you're having, but you stop seeing them as the other that needs to be destroyed and completely obliterated, and you start seeing them exactly the way you just described them, Tim. They're people, and you want them to experience thriving instead of to be controlled by hate and by fear and disgust, because those are actually ways that we get like frozen, we get stuck, we get controlled, we don't get to live out our freedom and what it means to be fully human when you're living a life completely contained by fear and hate and disgust.
Yes.
And so
that's it.
The goal of this, when they contaminate them, is not to pretend in this Pollyanna world that there aren't people who wish you harm, who are trying to cause real harm, who will hurt you. There are adversaries out there. There are people who will work to do horrible things. I think we're experiencing that. And so one of the things we try to be careful of is to not to like tell people to ignore boundaries.
Right.
But there's a real difference between recognizing the significance of a boundary out of wisdom and the significance of a boundary out of disgust.
Right.
Yeah.
One justifies the boundary by saying, because the other person is even a human, they're filth. The other says, I am going to try to protect myself. And in fact, in many ways, is a form of love to the other. I'm not going to enable your horrific actions of harming me and harming other people to the extent that I can, and holds out love because I want you to be transformed as well. I want you to experience the freedom that Christ has given me. I'll pause here because I think Billie has some things to say, but I think
I have a question for Billie too.
Go for it, Tim. I was actually enjoying letting Paul cook, so I didn't have.
Me too, Paul. Listen, here's some brutal feedback. You should talk more, not less. I mean, the stuff you say is so good. Like, I would not doubt yourself. If you were that bad, I would just edit you out half the time.
Okay, that's fair.
And you would never know. But I feel like at this point, I can tell you, like, Paul, just shut the hell up. But no, keep going. You say great stuff. Honestly, it's so helpful. Billie, I mean, I'm going to ask you a friend question if you're cool with it. Mm-hmm. I really have always kind of wondered this. You are a trans woman, which puts you in like literally 1.5% of the population, right? Identifies as trans, let alone a trans woman. And you are someone who is living, in a time where very powerful, strong, billionaire-backed forces are really putting a target on your back, and I mean that quite literally. How do you think about that enemy love piece that Paul just talked about with like the boundary versus what they're discussing? Because frankly, I have a personal rule where I don't tell, in particular, minority groups and marginalized groups how to respond to Christian nationalism, okay? I will tell white people what I think, how we should respond to it. But when it comes to the Black experience, the immigrant experience, I have my personal opinions, but it's just not for me to be directing how you should and shouldn't react, right? And so I'm just kind of curious for you, how you think about the whole enemy thing, given that you are the person that is being targeted. I mean, you were targeted by libs of TikTok. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. We did a whole response video to libs of TikTok a while ago. So how do you think about this in the terms of Eucontamination?
Thank you. No. So two thoughts. First one is to affirm your sometimes not telling other people how to feel is not great, right? Like that's just generally a good rule. Even when it comes to disgust, one of the things that's come up with Paul and with me and talking about this is it's not the advice we have when it comes to disgust is not telling people it's bad to feel disgust, right?
Right.
Where you want to do some self-reflection is the degree to which you let disgust shape your actions moving forward. And there are ways to decrease your overall disgust reaction if that's a thing that you want to do. But like having disgust is not like a morally culpable thing. You just do. Like you just do experience it, right? So telling people they shouldn't feel a particular way is a fool's errand, and also it can get really problematic in ways that you described. So sort of that point one there. Point two, but how do I do this myself? First is those boundaries are different for me than they are for you and for Paul, because there are legitimately different safety concerns, right? Like I am on record as like thrilled that you go to these like nationalist and right-wing things. I would not go to those places because I do not, in my considered opinion, believe that I would be safe in those contexts, right? Partly because I understand disgust, and I know what happens when somebody feels disgust towards me. Right, when I'm experienced as a threat to the sanctity of one of those spaces, like that's right. So I am not physically safe to do it, and therefore I don't. Right, like that is not a space that I would go to. And I would celebrate you going there because I do want to see. Like I would actually lament that I don't get to go to those spaces, that it is not safe for me to go into those spaces. That's not to say that there isn't some trans person out there who might feel that like they have some sort of a calling from God that they need to do that, in which case, blessings on them. But I don't think I have that calling, right? Like I write, I put my words out into the world, and that is the way that that is the extent of the way that I am working to have any kind of influence in those spaces. If they want to read what I write, that's great, because that is, that crosses a boundary that I have set up that respects my own safety, right, and my own security in this context, right? But again, that is a boundary that I set up on the basis of considered attention and reflection, and it is forever negotiable, right? Situations could change, new information can come in, and I might decide to sit down and say, now I think the mood has changed, things are different, and now maybe it is safer for me to do that. The other thing that I do, and this is just a very kind of basic practical piece of advice, is I try to pay a lot of attention to when I can sense that conversations are happening in good faith versus when interactions are happening in bad faith. I do, because of a lot of the work we're doing and talking about, I do work to keep good faith representations of my adversaries in my life, right? Like, and I think about this in terms of like the ways that I curate my my social media feeds, right? Yeah. Like, and I do from my own like safety and my own sanity. There are things that I will block. There are things that I will mute. There are things like I just can't see that anymore. It's not healthy for me to keep doing that. I remember when I was being attacked by libs of TikTok, my therapist like practically begged me, and she was right. She said, look, find some friends who can monitor your social media, who can monitor what's being said about you, and will let you know if there's something you need to know for the sake of like urgency. Yeah. And then you need to look away, because this is not healthy for you to keep like looking at people wanting you to die.
You're just triggering yourself. You can't do anything about it. It's a horrible feeling. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely. And at the same time, I have worked hard. Like I graduated from a conservative Bible college. I have some very conservative Christian friends, and I have worked to hold on to those relationships as best I can. Several have walked away, but it was they walked away. And I'm not saying other people have to hold on to those relationships. Like, again, sometimes people can be, if somebody is being abusive to you in your relationship, I'm not saying hold on to it. right?
Right.
But I'm saying where it is healthy, there is value in holding on to it because of everything that we're talking about vis-a-vis Eucontamination. I hope that was a helpful answer.
That was great. No, always really helpful. Listen, I mean, is there anything else that we're missing for this part of the conversation? Because I feel like we said so much and there's so much to chew on, but I don't want to miss anything that maybe you want to hit about the book or why, or maybe some favorite parts of the book that you want to talk about. But in my mind, I think we gave a pretty damn good overview of the book and also both of your work as well and why it's so powerful to think about this stuff.
I want to add one little piece of theology, and it looks like Paul wants to add something too. So I'm going to do
go
my
ahead,
theology bit that is like tacking it on. It goes back to an earlier part of our conversation, but where Paul was talking about that, like when you retreat to what is familiar and same and unchanging, that's boring. And in fact, that's a kind of death.
Yeah.
And I want to say that is not the vision of heaven that we have in the Bible. And in the end of our book, we draw very heavily on Lewis and his vision, the contrary vision of heaven that he paints in the Chronicles of Narnia, where the catchphrase is "Come further up, come further in." That in fact, joy lies in leaving yourself open to always exploring and always learning more, learning more, knowing more, delving deeper, right? So our vision of heaven, our theological vision of heaven or what is good or the kingdom of God or, whatever, however your audience wants to understand this. But our vision of it is not of a static place where you go and now everything is determined and nothing will ever change. It's a place of forever falling deeper, forever learning more. We will be surrounded by infinite beings whom we will have eternity to get to know. We will not get bored in heaven because there will be other people there, and every person is infinitely deep and complex and forever changing and growing. And so we will always be learning each other more. We will always be learning God more, and we will always be telling each other more about what we have been learning. So it is, again, this space of like healthiness and growth and joy and celebration looks like being open to growth and learning more and transformation, right? When you talk about finding better paths forward means learning new things, means being open to being Eucontaminated by all that we have not yet experienced. So that's my little bit of theology that I wanted to tack on.
That's fantastic. I love it.
No, I love that. I would just kind of end with, like, for a book that's actually all about disgust in some ways, like we spend a whole lot of time talking about joy and love and desire. Like that's actually what this is about. Like, and so the book itself is structured around the verse where Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And so we argue that, like, what if we take that seriously? We say, what if truth is Jesus? Like, what if truth is a contaminant, not a little thing that you hold on to and then beat other people over the head with? What if truth is a germ that gets in you and continues to change you? And when I say you, I mean you individually and y'all, like as a group. And the same with life, and the same with the way of Jesus. What if these are germs that contaminate us in beautiful ways towards Christ? Now, that's what the book explores. It's this kind of, we tried to be rather playful, despite being perhaps a little overly academic and analytic at sometimes. But to say, like, what if more is happening? And what if we listen to our disgust and allow that to speak to us a little bit more about who we are, both collectively, but also individually, as we pursue the way, the truth, and the life of Jesus?
Yeah. If people are on the fence, let me help them out. Yours truly did endorse the book. I have a written endorsement for the book, so another reason to go ahead and buy it.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, of course. But my last thought is this. One thing I love about your book is that it's so Christian. like this deconstruction thing, right? You're kind of exploring different rooms. You're maybe on the fence. Like, do I say Christian? Is there some kind of Christian theology that's like very Christ-centric and has this like, deep rootedness that also makes sense of the world? And like, yeah, this book does. I love how it's like obsessed with Jesus and like the person of Jesus. And it's very traditional in its theology, right? You're not presenting like things that are like, whoa, no one's ever said that before. Like you're taking very, dare I use the term, orthodox Christian beliefs, right? And you're applying them in ways that I think are actually perhaps even more accurate than how I was taught to understand them earlier. So I just can't recommend this book enough, friends. The book is called Eucontamination. It's phenomenal. You can get it anywhere, right? It's on Amazon, everywhere where books are sold. Yeah. And I'll make sure too, friends, that we link this in our TNE community space, TNE Connect. We have our own little book, a bookshop there, and we'll put it there as well, so you folks can find it there. Billie and Paul, as always, it's always a pleasure talking to both of you. Billie, I'm I'm sure I'll talk to you tomorrow, texting
Oh,
you something. And we're recording this before Theology Beer Camp. I'm not sure when this will come out, but I'm looking forward to seeing both of you at Theology Beer Camp with a bunch of our other friends. It's going to be great. If people want to follow your work, do either of you have like public facing social media profiles? Can you go ahead and plug that information for us?
For sure. I'll do mine first because hopefully people will remember this one, and Paul barely enjoys the internet. So I am
very true.
I am at Billie is writing on most of the socials. I've mostly moved away from Twitter. I'm very, very occasionally, but not. I mean, it's just kind of anyway. But yeah, mostly on Blue Sky, on Threads, on Instagram, and on Substack. I do read a Substack as well. And I'm at Billie is writing on all of those. And I would love to chat, DM me. Let's talk about Disgust and Eucontamination. I'm also going to take an opportunity. I want to plug at Theology Beer Camp. We're doing a pregame show with Tamis, who is one of my favorite people in the world. So I hope people will take a look at that.
Jesus. Tamis is so legit. I have to get her back on the show. We talk often too, and I tell her all the time, I'm like, you are like, it's almost supernatural, your level of wisdom, especially for this cultural moment. So I'm a huge fan.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Paul, go ahead and follow that up.
Yeah, as somebody who hates the internet,
Cool.
I'm primarily on Substack, where I publish some blogs on Lacanian psychoanalytic theory and virtues and things like that. Also, yeah, I'm more of an academic, so I usually put my the papers I'm writing and things like that up there. But you can find me at Paul Hoard Substack. So.
Love that. Honestly, Substack's been great. The new Evangelicals has a community Substack now, and it's a great place. I write there personally as well, so it's awesome. Well, listen, Billie and Paul, thank you so much for making time. It's always a pleasure. We'll do this again soon. Friends, don't forget, if you're looking for a better path forward, I recommend getting plugged into TNE Connect. It's a great free community space that's totally off of the meta grid and off of the algorithm. It's totally built in-house. We do Theology 101, conversation circles. We have unique spaces, regional group chats. It's a great way to get plugged in. It's totally free. It's TNE Connect. You can get it on Android or on Apple Play App Store, or you can get it on the web. You can just go to TNE Connect. Go to the newevangelicals.com/connect, and you can get it there as well. All right, we'll do this again soon, friends. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.